over there.
I know, that's what I was thinking. I'm also thinking like, probably like better just to get things.
It totally is.
Like we can walk around.
It'll be very informal.
Exactly.
We are not formal people. That's not our thing.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
All right, so this is gonna be a
Great.
Yeah.
I mean, you have enough light because we can always have more light.
No, we don't need more light. I'm already hot.
Okay.
All right,
Because
so
less light.
no, it's streaming. It's fine. All right, so appropriately informal beginning. I'm Elæ Moss, and this is
Marshall Weber.
And we are here in Brooklyn, in Booklyn. Also, this is we are on the ancestral land of the Munsee-speaking people, the Munsee Lenape in Lenapehoking, in what is now known as Brooklyn, New York, on the larger Turtle Island. And I'm really excited to be with Marshall today, down the hall from my own studio, even though we would probably both be shutting it down, but we're just giving you tools to shut it down, so that's fine.
There you go.
That feels effective.
And this is the only thing that's happening here today, so it's exceptional.
In fact, that's true. So I will let Marshall I gave you all a little bio for Marshall, but for anyone who's joining us for the first time, I will let you give like a short self bio. I hate doing a formal one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
At first I just wanted to set a little more of the geography because we're here in Sunset Park, Brooklyn.
Yeah.
We're in the Brooklyn Army Terminal, which was a giant Army terminal in service until towards the end of the Vietnam War and was built at the end of World War II. We're in a part of the Army Terminal that is now called Art Built, which is a nonprofit organization that does mobile artist studios, but also rents 50,000 square feet from the Economic Development Corporation of the City of New York. So we're in a public-private development and a city-owned building in the neighborhood of Sunset Park, which has a very large population of Mexican, Central American communities. And there's part of the community that people call Puebla, York, because so many people come from the state of Puebla. There's also a very large Arab American, Syrian, Yemeni, Palestinian community just a little bit further down in Bay Ridge. And so it's a very dynamic community here. And I just wanted to kind of set that scene as we go further.
I think in addition to the sort of human socio-geography of this place, the actual geography of the place is also really important because we're in New York Bay. So if we were to be looking at a picture of New York City, we're in the part of Brooklyn, which is part of the island of Long Island. So we're on southwest Brooklyn, almost at the southwestern tip of Brooklyn, right on what's called New York Bay, which means that we're so far south of the island of Manhattan that all of Manhattan is to the north. And when you come downstairs from here, we're right on the bay. It is a huge open expanse of water and sky, and all of Manhattan and the islands below Manhattan and Statue of Liberty is to your right, to the north. And you're seeing this expanse of water, which I always feel like is an incredibly important thing because it also really reminds you that New York is and was a port city, a working port city that is served by boats and trains attached to boats. And downstairs in this building, there is a now defunct, but sort of army rail, which would have carried munitions. So we're really in, swords into plowshares territory here.
Yeah, the building is so large that at one point it was the largest concrete building in the Americas. And there's there were initially 3 train tracks that went into the buildings and into the courtyards that would take weaponry and ammunitions and out to the ferries, which are still running. The ferry still runs here at the Sunset Park ferry terminal. So it's a very interesting kind of solidly working class community still, and solidly kind of small fabricators, shipping companies, and now artists and art nonprofits are also part of the mix. In terms of myself, okay,
I
I'll keep it
like
short.
that framing.
I'm an artist, I'm a curator. I primarily focus on political issues and support services for social justice organizations and artists who identify themselves as activists. Some prefer to use the word culture workers, some prefer to use the word designer.
I like the word information worker. I've decided I'm taking that from librarians and archivists. I feel like that is right for me.
Yeah, we work with a lot of librarians and archivists because unlike other distros, Booklyn really focuses on distributing art and political ephemera to academic institutions, to schools, to libraries, to public museums, progressive museums, culture centers. So we are our goal is to kind of elide the commercial and corporate art world. We're not really interested in the gallery world, the museum world per se. We're not interested in auction houses and in marketing and the secondary market. As a matter of fact, we kind of feel like we are taking art and political ephemera out of the market and putting it into the public sector.
And into archives.
Which would, all these institutions that I mentioned, academic institutions, universities, public institutions, all collect art, they all collect books, they all collect archives. Now they all collect zines, and many of them now are collecting artist books, prints, photography, and kind of just recently, over the past 10 or 20 years, we're seeing a lot more collecting of political ephemera.
So it's been a really interesting sort of, I think, process of being, some of the people who were involved with what was more underground for a really long time, the sort of zine fairs and the collectors of zines, and maybe some of the museums or organizations that were interested in zines traditionally. But even like 10 years ago, the landscape was like totally changed, right? The sort of like the cultural institution sort of official acceptance of the zine or of this sort of ephemera as something to really be like actively trying to get as it's happening, as opposed to something that like, it gains in value 10, 20, 30, 50 years down, and then you're trying to find it or whatever. There really has been this sort of shift. And it's interesting because I think that organizations like Booklyn have been part of making that shift happen because, and, I think also sort of the little presses, the little magazines, and some, little publishers like myself as well, like making these things with an intention to do that, to do something that's anti-market. I remember I was on a podcast a couple of years ago and he was like, so your goal is to make things that don't sell. I was like, yes. And he was so like flummoxed by this, but I was like, well, the point is to understand that there's all these people who, because they're making things that are kind of anti-market in their nature, they're going to not really find a market because they're so avant-garde, because they're anti that. And so you're actually making sure that they make it into the archive, right?
Right. And I want to kind of step back also and realize that all these conversations about the market and about selling things and not selling things are really kind of fabricated. Because if we live in a socialist country where everybody got a basic wage and everybody had housing and everybody had free healthcare and everybody had public transportation and public schools, none of these conversations would be necessary. So remember, when we talk about the whole idea of alternative or underground or not commercial or not for profit,
we are in the United States.
We are in the United States, in a capitalist country that is diminishing socialist economics that actually provided the growth of this country in the form of like public highways, public libraries, public universities. Without socialism, there would be no United States of America. So I just think it's always good to remind ourselves that the structure is not inevitable, and it certainly is not infinite, and it certainly is not going to continue in perpetuity.
Not only is it not inevitable and infinite, but it isn't even happening in other places. Like we have this mirror ball in the United States as if like that's right. How it is everywhere. I mean, I think that one of the things that I try to, let my students know, and there's so many students here, and we'll sort of say hello to you in a minute. is that, I think one of the amazing things about working in the sort of network of artists and publishers and people who are making the kinds of publications and projects that you're making and that I try to make as well, it brings people into contact with people from other countries, right? Which has become more viable than it ever has been before for various technological reasons, even if you're making things largely using traditional book media, which Booklyn mostly does. And, I think that working with people from countries where there's such an incredible tradition of sort of cultural bottom up, like people's literature, people's movements of like everybody reading and, people being extremely highly literate in cultural ways. I think it's something we're not really as familiar with in the United States.
Yeah, I think public culture is limited in a country that is heavily corporatized and where things are marketed and where the market is exclusionary. So in a lot of other countries, this isn't necessarily true, but both in part because in some countries you don't have that ubiquitous corporate commercial structure.
My brain is like, do I have a Cartonera like in the OS?
Yeah. So in any case, I think it's important to realize that we're looking at immediate possibilities. The idea is not how much art you can sell, how many books you can sell, how many zines you can sell. The idea is, what is the impact of that work on the kind of trajectory towards social justice, the trajectory towards economic equity, the trajectory towards a sustainable economy and sustainable environmental practices.
So I can keep peppering you with questions, but I know you also have kind of like a spiel. So I could also just let you kind of do your spiel. How would you like to proceed?
Well, what I'm wondering is, I would, we have this great technology here to fool around with until something goes wrong. And I'm just
I should have one of them be our backup host. Right. Would someone put your hand up and volunteer to be a backup host in case we lose connection?
No.
Is that your friend?
That could be Jean-Louis.
Jean-Louis.
Yeah. Hey, Marshall, I love you.
Thank you, dear.
Do you want to be our backup host, Jean-Louis?
No, I don't have. I just have a stupid mobile phone.
Oh, well, that's terrible. One of my students, maybe, who would volunteer? Other than that, I'm going to choose one of you.
I can do it.
Okay. Cassidy, thank you so much.
So we've talked for 10 minutes, and I'm wondering if there are any questions.
Already.
I
also told them to maybe come up with questions.
Well, let's go in that direction.
I'm putting us on gallery view. It probably won't record this, though. It'll still just record you and I. That's what it does.
Good enough.
So don't worry, students. You're not actually on camera. You're not on the video. It will just stick on us unless you talk. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? So the people that are here, we've talked about this a little bit, are from my archive and access class. And then of course, we've also invited some guests and this will be archived. And so the students are working on all sorts of really amazing sort of archival projects and toolkits. But does anyone have any questions already for Marshall? Otherwise we can take them again later, I imagine.
Yeah, and I'll talk nonstop, so it's good to have a host because the host can moderate any questions that might pop up.
Yeah. So any questions to start? No. Let's keep going.
So I wanted to make a few points that you may or may have not covered in the class, and I work a lot with archives, and part of how Booklyn works with archives is we represent hundreds of artists and we work with hundreds of academic institutions. And Booklyn is about 23 years old. So some of our artists are dead. Some of our artists are dying. Some of our artists have healthcare issues. Many of our artists have no savings, no social security. They've lived in underground economies.
You're funny, Marshall.
I heard a question.
It's Jean-Louis.
Okay.
So you are very funny, Marshall.
Yes. Yes. So what we do in terms of archives is that we're trying to get artists who may not have been keeping in archives, artists who had no idea that their archives had value. We're using their archives to leverage end-of-life support, financial
Yes.
support. So, for instance, we just sold an archive by an artist called Fly, who is a well-beloved comic artist and squatter organizer and punk rock musician for many years, playing music with God as my co-pilot. Fly is a real diehard community artist, a true anarchist, still lives in a squat in the Lower East Side, is amazingly both ubiquitous and committed, no savings, works for free, much too much. So we made an arrangement with Columbia University to deposit Fly's gigantic archive into the Butler Library, and they gave Fly a bunch of money. So this is the only savings Fly's ever had. So these are the kind of operations that we're trying to do in terms of like seeing archives as resources, not just for the institutions or the public, but for the actual artist, kind of a means of social security.
And in a way, I mean, by performing this sort of like interstitial function and kind of helping artists know, even as they're working, that their archive does have value, it changes the way that you work as well, right? It can change your own practice as an artist or a maker to be like, oh, if I actually think about my archive as a thing that has value, I'm maybe less likely to like trash it all and be like, because, if you have someone advocating on your behalf, which is rare, obviously, too, and the people who are working with you are lucky to have that. There's a question on the site. Can you talk a bit about the catalog on Booklyn's site and how it functions as both a storefront and digital gallery space?
Yeah. So one of the things that's a little exceptional about our catalog, you can go online to Booklyn's catalog, you can buy a $3 zine, you can buy a $100,000 archive, you can buy, a $5,000 Belle Done Saison book, you can buy a lot of different stuff, you can buy,
Prints.
You can buy prints that support the Palestinian cause and Palestinian artists. You can buy prints that's,
this is a kite, right?
Like this kite right back here that will support a collaborative group of artists in Beirut. But you'll notice that one of the main functions of this catalog is that this is an archive of material that is deposited in collections, and it's never going to be deacquisitioned. So it becomes a source of data of what is in archives and library collections and galleries and museums around the world.
How do you ensure that it doesn't become disacquisitions? I literally just was reading this horror story of a traditional music collection that deacquisitioned like all of these ancient instruments, and they were the only ones that existed, and now they've like been destroyed. It's like horrible.
I mean, there's no guarantee.
Okay.
I mean, one of the things that's happening in Gaza right now is the Israelis are bombing all the libraries and the universities. So there is no guarantee of permanence anyways. But one of the ways that you keep stuff active is when Booklyn is distributing artworks, distributing book zines, we try to provide a lot of interpretive material. We try to meet the needs, the curricular needs of the institutions that we're dealing with. We try to push those needs towards the left, but we want to activate the material in the minds of all the librarians and faculty and as many students as possible before it even goes into the collection.
Yeah.
If people know something's there, they'll use it. If people have access to something there, the more usage, the more of a chance that the material will stay safe and used. The easiest way to keep something safe is to use it.
Especially in a library, right? Yeah. Because there's like tracking of like, how much is this getting used? Who's using it? Like we only have a certain amount of space. Like, oh, no one's ever taken this out. Now and then they put it in the,
Right. And that's kind of a little bit of the tension between a museum archive and a library archive or an academic archive. And it's also, we go from this idea of archives as a way of preserving alternative or marginalized or under-resourced culture, but also we want to not bring everything into an institutional environment. We also want to keep archives in communities, develop community archives, develop living archives, so that, the optimum situation would be for every artist to have their archive go to a public archive in their neighborhood or a community institution in their neighborhood. So there's a big movement now to keep cultural resources in communities and
Yes.
in smaller archives that are community-based, community organized. And who should fit the bill for this is all the wealthy academic institutions and all the museums, right? Because the reason why you have this, dearth of resources in communities is because institutions have stolen those resources via the state. So
because of the underfunding of the equivalent resources from the state, right? So the like horrific underfunding of public libraries means that, like, in many cases, public libraries, even if they want to buy these things, like, just don't simply have the resources to do so. As we just saw in New York, as funding is going towards all sorts of things, all the libraries are going to be closing. They right now are open 7 days a week doing all sorts of public services, and none of them will be open 7 days anymore.
yeah.
Hey,
So,
Marshall, are we just boomers?
I'm not going to answer that question.
Next.
Are we old school?
I think the idea is we had some great ideas. And John Louis, who's talking now, for instance, was a gallerist in San Francisco who, unlike many other gallerists, would support a scope of artists ranging from artists who were doing really commercial gallery work to artists who were doing really alternative and underground and political work, and had the curatorial vision to get both public institutions to show this work, but also to get private collectors to collect it. It's kind of giving a little infusion of cash that, for instance, as an artist, got me over and able to do more public and political work.
I had a show at Undercurrent Gallery that was like on like
You remember-
4th Street. They did similar things.
So that's a good idea, Jean-Louis. That's a baby boomer idea, that there can be shared resources through mixed economies.
Yeah. We're still trying to fucking figure out how to make it work, though.
Of course, but we got to pass the baton.
Yeah,
I
okay.
have a student who has to leave to go do
I got you.
organization and unionization efforts. We support you, Annika. Thank you for your labor.
Okay. More questions?
good,
Can we see
good.
more questions pop up here?
No, not right now. Should we talk about did you want to talk about any of the specific, like, sort of projects that's moving into maybe institutions in that way? Or should we take a little walk around the studio, or you have materials right here?
Well, let's give just a few examples of archival projects that have gone out into the communities. Right. And everything I'm talking about now, I'm really just skimming the top. So keep Booklyn's website in mind, booklyn.org.
I sent it to everybody in my class, at least.
Like Brooklyn without the R. Well, the first thing I would really recommend is our book called Freedom of the Presses, which is
it's so good.
One of the first anthologies that discusses collage, works on paper, artist books, zines, and archives from a 21st century perspective in terms of the modality of activist art.
If it's not there yet, we can request it for the Crosset Library. They'll get almost anything. So we'll do.
This is a project that Booklyn worked on called Friends, Peace, and Sanctuary. And it was a project that was done with Swarthmore University.
Swarthmore College?
Yeah, Swarthmore College.
I went there.
Oh, how do you like that? So they have a huge peace archive.
They do.
That is a great resource.
In McCabe.
Yeah, and it stems from kind of like Quaker communities and local studies, and then all the way up into international studies and things like that. And they have a close relationship with Pew Charitable Trust because of oil investments. And I don't know if you know the history of Pew Charitable Trust, but the Pew family was a big fossil fuel family, and they would give people money so that they wouldn't divest from fossil fuel investment. So kind of a classic charitable philanthropy activity. But in any case, you can delve into that. There was a grant funded by Pew that was targeted at helping Syrian and Iraqi refugees and meeting them up with American and Egyptian artists in order to make art, to explore the archives of the Peace Archive at Swarthmore in relation to the wars in Iraq and Syria, and to provide resources for Syrian artists and community members and Iraqi refugee community members. And you had really brilliant artists participating in this. I was a cultural consultant, but really well-beloved artists in Philadelphia like Eric Ruin and the People's Paper Cooperative, Courtney Bowles and Mark Strandquist, and then some other artists from all over the United States and Islam Ali from Cairo. And so we had this cohort of artists working with refugees from Iraq and Syria. And it's an interesting situation because here you have refugees from American bombing campaigns and invasion being relocated and then dealing with American culture and dealing with all the issues of immigration and refugee status. But they made absolutely incredible artwork and this amazing catalog that really is kind of like a case study in developing a public archive, a community. Yeah, this is in Arabic and English, so it's really wonderful do-si-do with lots of resources and lots of stories and poetry and photography. And out of this, you have this introduction of all this contemporary material into the Peace Archive at Swarthmore. But you also have the people who organized and were part of the dissemination of the services also republished, like kind of reinvigorated an Arab language newspaper for the city of Philadelphia. And it's the first Arab language newspaper that's been published for decades. And that project is continuing. So a lot of these resources that are revolving around archives can spin off into larger cultural projects. And also there's a reality of having these institutional archives at prestigious institutions become anchors for corporate or public or foundation funding, and that these funds can then be steered toward more kind of progressive activities while still having actual material bases in a material archive, sometimes in a digital archive. And these are the kind of projects that I think can be kind of leveraged throughout the library and museum and information technology world.
And this is such an interesting thing because what's sort of being talked about without necessarily being talked about is sort of, about, it's a redistribution ethic is what it is. And it's also sort of what I've talked about with my students. It does fall within the sort of idea of, a fugitive practice, like within or in relationship to the university. You're sort of like, I don't really approve necessarily what the university is doing. It's not great that so much of the resources are there. And yet so much of the resources are there. And there's people there who are willing to put the resources towards these things, and then it can go back into the community. It can also make projects like this actually happen and bring someone like Marshall to do this public, you know what I mean, and make this incredible book, this incredible project happen with people from all these different places in the world, and then make it available to other people, right? So it's a complicated calculus of when we engage, when we disengage. I'm often sort of, and I'm sure my students could tell you that I've said this many times, that it's sort of like, while we're building these alternative systems, we take sometimes what we can from the ones that still exist, because right now we're still in the process of other things being nascent and not there. They haven't replaced yet. It's such a difficult process, right? So it's sort of coexisting, right?
Right, yeah, and I think once again, as artists, as culture makers, as librarians, what we need to have in the back of our minds and in the front of our eyeballs at all times is kind of a visionary perspective on this. I mean, I'm not working with Pew Charitable Trust or Swarthmore College because I like the institutional structure,
Nope.
or I like the political culture. It's because in the back of my mind, I'm thinking of a future where Swarthmore College is a public institution and it's free to go to school there, and where there's no such thing as a Pew Charitable Trust, because all that money, which was stolen, goes back into the public coffers. And so my activities there are not based on the current culture of the institution.
There's been really good divestment stuff at Swarthmore traditionally, but it's pretty quiet right now.
Yeah, that students have tried for decades there to divest from fossil fuels.
I know.
And they, the political situation down there is so complicated that it's been difficult.
Yeah.
I did notice that quite recently, RMIT, the Institute of Technology in Melbourne, Australia, is one of the first universities in the world to publicly support a ceasefire in Gaza and to publicly support prosecution of Israel for war crimes. So we're starting to see, even within academia, kind of like a stepping up, a change in perspective. So again, you know, I think if anything, kind of the struggle of the Palestinian people gives us a real high bar to remain visionary and to remain optimistic and to struggle and resist and to utilize the cultural resources that we have to both show solidarity, but also to engage in direct action.
But it's really interesting, you know, like talking to librarians, both in public institutions and in private institutions, it's such an interesting space because there is quite a bit of freedom, actually. Like even when my students and I were sort of pulling the current reading room that's at Crosset Library, they're like on the Gaza conflict and the history of that conflict, I was pretty impressed actually with the holdings of the library, like just traditionally, like actually quite massive holdings, and the students can tell you like it's actually pretty impressive. But you know, from talking to the librarians there, like there's a lot of freedom to gather materials, not always necessarily as much freedom to do like public facing loud things, as long as the library is performing social functions, public functions, and providing certain services and space, then other things can happen, but they need to kind of be underground. And I think this is always a really interesting thing for students to recognize, because I found that like I call it the shadow plan, because the students at Bennington have this thing called the plan that they create. And I'm like, what's the shadow plan? But like, actually the funny thing is that the university itself actually has multiple shadow plans, right? It's sort of like the institutional narrative of what's actually going on. But then there's all these other shadow narratives of like what's actually going on behind the scenes in terms of fiscal, and then what's actually going on behind the scenes of the librarians who are like, maybe have these agendas, but they can't really like talk about them. So maybe they bring them into the library, and it requires like an outside artist like me who has no stakes in the game to like do something. And they're sort of like, we won't do it, but we won't tell you not to do it. Right. And so like that's happening. But then like public.
It's that thing about shadow work. You know, Ivan Illich was very clear about that one, shadow work, about the women's work. Okay. It's like all that invisible work. Okay. It is about that.
Well, I think the British government incorporates the shadow government, right? The opposition party is considered the shadow party, and they actually have a shadow ministry for every ministry. Everything operates that way. And I think that idea is really important when we start looking not just in the institutions, because yes, there's, you know, you can, Harvard has a great library, but you know, their Kennedy International Center's curriculum is pretty fascist. I mean,
exactly, because all those books are in the shadows. It's exactly what we're talking about, is that all that work remains in the shadow.
Yes, but let's talk about going from the institutions. We talk about just the New York area.
Yeah.
There's a whole network of public archives and public information and culture resources that are available outside of academia, outside of state institutions. So you've got the Interference Archive in Park Slope in Brooklyn, which is one of the largest repositories of, you know, leftist and progressive political ephemera, books, scenes.
Do they digitize?
But I don't think that is the primary function. Some of that material is digitized, but you also have to look at what the kind of the whole underground circuit of small art institutions like the Pit in Brooklyn, or the Word is Change, progressive bookstores, or Blue Stockings bookstore, where these bookstores, these small libraries operate as cultural centers.
We had a great guest next week. I don't know if you know Writ Large Projects, which was like out of LA and also Pittsburgh. Right. And so Chi Wan and those folks have just acquired a building in Pittsburgh. So they're gonna, and we had Chi on last week because we go back to millionaires. And so like they're in the process of building a brick and mortar. And I actually was also building a brick and mortar for the operating system, like in the end of 2019, but then COVID came and everything, you know. But I think a lot of people, you know, a lot of organizations are working on seeing how we can build physical spaces, and sometimes
exactly.
Sometimes it's
We're
not.
back to the physicality. We're back to the physicality, you see. See, that's really important.
All right, so
Shall we walk around and look at things?
well, I want to know if there are any other questions from any of the students, or like where, what reactions, commentary, what you want us to talk about perhaps, or let's just see if we get any input from
For
the
sure.
viewers.
And viewers like you.
Viewers like you. Okay, otherwise that we're just gonna keep on talking.
We can.
Okay.
We've had to do that.
So let's just do a quick walk around.
Yeah.
We'll give you a little tour of
I'm
what we
excited.
have here at Booklyn.
Okay, and let us know. I'll just sort of, anyone speak up or talk in the chat if you can't hear us. Wait, this is hard because I can't see what it's seeing. So you have to keep
we're gonna
looking.
go out into the hall.
Are we? Okay.
Because-
Will the internet still work? Oh yeah, this is our studio
So this is
building.
art build, and I want to make a point about silence and obfuscation. There's a lot of artists here, a lot of art organizations, everybody is kind of like neoliberal and kind of progressive, but you'll notice that there's no flagging here except with Booklyn. And we've got like
A bunch of stuff on my door, but
What is that?
we're talking.
we are too.
So there's very few people that will flag because there's very few overtly public political commitment within the art, as we know. So we just got stuff stacked up from all previous demonstrations, all the stuff like Garner, Rikers, Black Lives Matter, police, defund the police, statements of principles. Of course, we've had the boycott flag up since about 2014.
I have an Afrofuturist thing on the door.
We feel safer without police.
Exactly. Something about, we have like all this trans stuff in there. And then I have a magnet that says link in bio, and it's
Here's our Booklyn, our arts, which he's had forever. There's going to be a sort of art pieces, and these are pieces from Voces de las Fronteras in Milwaukee. We helped them get their archive to the University of Milwaukee. And we've been, one thing that Booklyn does is makes mini archives for social justice organizations.
Which is awesome.
We sell them to academic institutions, and give the money to those social justice organizations. This is a union project. When we fight, we win. I think we're gonna look at this later. It may be a good place to
Kind of
end.
close.
Yeah.
When we fight, we win.
Our little photo station, a big giant collage of mine that's on its way to the Museum of Rome.
Roma.
You never know what's going on here. Flat files, other kinds of prints, box sets, our little wall of fame. These are publications that Booklyn has published, or that other artists that we work with have published, including a bunch of stuff from people in Art Belt. So just, you never know what's going to end up in here. I really highly recommend this book. This is Nicholas Lampert. He is one of the Art Build Worker founders. These are a group of screen printers who travel all around the United States, working with social justice and union groups, teaching people how to do public art builds, to make huge amounts of material for public protest. But this is a whole people's art history of the United States.
Another good one for CrossFit, actually, if it's not already there.
Yeah, and yes, he did get permission from Howard Zinn to use this title. They all those folks know
Very
each
nice.
other.
Thank
A
you, Marshall.
wonderful project by local Corona Queens group, Mobile Print Power. We love them so
Yeah,
much.
so good. Street printing.
They travel
Yeah.
around teaching people how to do screen printing on the street, and they're just a really
They would be
wonderful
awesome to bring to Bennington,
group
actually.
of people. Yeah, super radical. Bunch of Booklyn.
Should we build a
publications.
ice cream style print box? I
God.
bet people in this class would love to do that in the spring.
So this is kind of the artist book engine of Booklyn, because what Booklyn does is we sell high-end stuff to universities and museums.
And zines to
And-
people like me.
And yeah, and then we sell zines and affordable artworks to people online and at various fairs and stuff like that. Monica Johnson of Booklyn will be at the Brooklyn Museum of Art this Sunday. There's a printed matter zine fair. So that will be fun. I'm really glad I don't have to work there though. So lots of books. lots more archival material.
Some interference archive stuff.
Yeah, we also distribute stuff for interference
them.
archives. So a lot of people come to us to say, like, we have extras of all this. What do we do with them? And we go, like, give them to us. We'll turn them into money, and we'll disseminate them to other institutions, and we'll give the cash back to you. So it's a little Robin Hood kind of a thing.
Remarkable.
Lots of archives, more inventory. We actually have a shadow archive for interference archive. We have we have our comics ourselves archive right now. We've worked with the Nathan Cummings Foundation to do educational box set about climate justice and water issues, like The Waters We Rise. I mentioned Fly's archive before.
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
This is actually supposed to be at Columbia, but I just found it, and this is archival material from Fly that will go to Columbia University. Tons of awesome punk stuff. This is just like the most
so good
stuff.
Attack of the Squat Goblins. So good.
Squat Goblins.
Marco, I love you.
Size of an archive like this, we took 40 banker boxes worth of material to Columbia University as part of the Fly archive.
That's
So
fucking cool.
gives you an idea of kind of what goes on here at Booklyn.
Also, something I don't think that we mentioned is, in the sort of politics of art built in general, I mean, there still is a desire to have some of these spaces do good work. And so over the last couple of years, they gave quite a large space to South Brooklyn Mutual Aid. So there is actually now sort of the headquarters of the mutual aid organization that grew much larger during 2020 as the need kind of exploded. And so I believe that they're just giving it to them, right? They're letting them use it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what, I mean, that was the initial arrangement. And South Brooklyn Mutual Aid provides thousands.
It is
meals.
massive. Yeah. They're doing massive work. So that's happening out of here as well, which is nice.
Cool.
Okay, so what's our timeline?
I mean, we can go as long as we like, but I think on the books, I think we had like about an hour, but it's up to you.
Yeah, okay. So again,
this is a labor thing.
Well, yeah.
So no extracting labor from
go into some
the art friends
real soon.
Fantastic.
Last chance not the last chance. Here's another chance for questions before we dive into a look at a particular archive portfolio project.
Anyone? They're shy.
Okay. So just to give you an idea of using the model of an archive as a way to both instigate preservation of radical culture, but also to advance direct actions that actually provide for the conditions of social change.
Totally.
So this is When We Fight, We Win. It's a public education advocacy toolbox. And it was a piece that Booklyn did in cooperation with the Art Guild workers in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who I mentioned before, the National Education Association, which is the largest union in the country. It's a teachers union. And so in this box set, we were
as opposed to UFC, who just like rejected a ceasefire thing. Not
so.
I'm gonna move this.
So one of the things when you're thinking about archive materials, political materials, is as artists, we're always thinking of kind of creative ways to activate this stuff. So when Art Guild workers were asked by the NEA to help them design protest and organizational and publicity material for the United Teachers of LA and the Oakland Educational Association's teacher strikes in 2019, we had an idea of proactively making mini archives during the production. So you'll see these huge art builds that happen here. And during the art builds, what we said is you guys save 25 of each of the items that you're producing.
Yeah.
So, there was an initial print that was made and they saved 25 extras of these. And so we put them into these giant box sets.
This is when we talk about what it means to be archive and access facing, which is like the whole OS's thing, right? It's sort of like not only know that it's something that you can do later, but like when you're making the work to be thinking already. And, you know, in a way, it's what Decolonize This Place is doing. It's like you're doing an action and it may only be there for a second, but you're already thinking of the archival use of the action. It's sort of like we're taking a photo of this for the long term of the thing.
So it's not like there's just one arc.
No,
So there are like 25 of these all over the
they must,
United States.
exactly.
And the actual the teachers union has them so that they can always use these to teach for
That's
their
beautiful.
art built and organizing activities.
Mhm.
The NBA actually has an archival copy and a teaching copy that they use to teach organizing abilities. So
That's a
the Art Build Workers got a coalition of artists together throughout California to design all these amazing banners. And these banners were used during protests.
Yeah.
And so we're archiving them, and they're gorgeous screen prints on this muslin. So they're very light. You can print thousands of them. You can put them up onto frames and put them up onto sticks. We'll see some documentation of that. This is kind of a concept developed by David Solnick, who works out of the Bay Area, who's a really well-known cultural worker, and whose sister is Rebecca Solnick, the author.
That's okay. We are live and candid.
That was Aaron Hughes, the anti-war activist and curator of the Veterans Art Museum in Chicago.
Fantastic. Hello,
So
Aaron.
look at these
In fact,
awesome, beautiful
so beautiful.
pieces.
I love the colorway.
And think just how effective this is compared to the typical union sign, which says on strike. So the idea is, you know, infographics, right? Infographics.
Well, and this is such an interesting thing about sort of the idea of like relational aesthetics, right? And people are like, oh, that's the people one. You know, but it's sort of like if you understand relational aesthetics, it is to say it's very much like pop. It's sort of like I understand that art is gonna do more than this other sign, right? But we're not doing it to make the thing because we understand the aesthetic. We actually care about the outcome of, I don't want that to wrinkle. I'm bringing the camera with me. But
That is a very, very interesting point, of course, okay, that we have to continue to hammer. Is politics leading the art, or is the art leading the politics?
Or both.
both,
So
always both.
So the idea of having an archive that is meta, right? That documents itself, documents the making of the artwork, documents the actual historical conditions. So here we're, you know, within every package, the whole idea of this also is that this could be used for teaching, but also for kind of gallery representation. So
Beautiful.
you have collections of all prints around the events that were also saved. You know, whenever somebody printed something, they saved 25 prints for us, and we gather them into these archives. And so these, you know, the banners are obviously used for the marches and the actual strikes, whereas the prints might be used in community organizations, in other classroom settings.
Working on a computer, I feel like my camera works pretty decent.
Really nice.
Also,
really
notice
nice.
bilingual. We've got the bilingual thing kicking out here.
Yeah.
And then just to make it, you know, Jean-Louis used the word hammer it, you know. So in order to hammer it, you have a multimedia.
I didn't, but you did.
Modality. And so
These are
the entire process is documented.
as it
So
must be.
Here's one of the union
Archive
halls
as you
in LA.
go. Mhm.
Here's people using the banners that we were just looking at. Here's some of the people marching. So this is a lot more effective. And what this actually does is it actually attracts media attention.
Of course.
It actually, but it also garners.
Again, that's what
neighborhood-
CTP is doing all the time.
neighborhood participation. So here's an image from one of the art builds where teachers, parents, students, children are all coming together to do the production work for the material that will be used in the march.
But and then also, of course, like as they're doing that, children are learning that this is a thing that they can do with art, right? Like it's not only like the making of the thing. Can you show that one? Because it's the scale. The
That's one of
scale is
parachutes.
incredible.
This is the piece by Fabiana Rodriguez. So one of the reasons why you have the parachutes is there are a lot of state capitals are rotundas. So they have this round lobby.
Mhm.
And in places like Madison, Wisconsin, and other places, they would make these giant parachutes.
And they fold them and go in and do a quick action, take a photo. And
so again, the legislators would be walking into their second floor, legislative rooms, chambers, and they'd look down to the first floor lobby and they see this gigantic image.
I mean, and planning for that is like, it's an architectural thing, it's a public space thing, and you're going in, your scale, your dimensions.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're ticking off a giant list
Exactly.
of like kind of strategies and tactics. Here's Boots Riley. You got to get the celebrities involved in any movement. Here's other people holding the parachute, holding the signs. Here's David Solnit doing, a checklist of things that need to be done. So you can see that this is not hundreds, like they're making thousands of pieces of material. And this is not.
I like that blue tape made it in.
So you have organizers with their children, and you have, now these are all parents. And so what you're doing by engaging people is you're also developing solidarity.
And what you're also seeing with something like this is a public school. And so I've been talking to the students a little bit somewhat about like the rights that they have. And it's interesting because if you look for student rights, you're actually going to find, especially from the ACLU, more student rights information about public universities, because it's actually the privatization of places like Bennington or Swarthmore or Pratt that make it more complicated, right? Because actually in public school systems, there is a clearer line of what students have the right to do, because it extends the rights of students in the public sphere into the school sphere. Whereas in privatized university systems, you're more in a corporation. Right. Well, you actually are in a corporation, and you're in a corporation, and that corporation controls what you can do.
So the other thing is many artists identify as culture workers and as union organizers in themselves. So this is Melanie Cervantes and Jesus Barzara. They make up a group called Dignidad Rebelde, and this is a design that they volunteered to the group. This is one of the union organizers whose name I'm forgetting. But you have participation. You have a community that stands, and then you can see that these are gigantic.
And there you've also got sort of like a bread and puppet kind of.
So in some ways, it's really important to point out that these aren't like new ideas.
No.
These are continuations of culture like bread and puppet that we've seen before.
They just came to Bennington. So some of these students I know went and saw their new.
Even in the rain.
One.
But part of the issue is it's a toolkit, right? Mm-hmm. Just like say, so light balsa, light wood, nail the thing in, screw the thing in. When you have 40 people painting, you can make a lot of freaking hand-colored designs when you have.
And it's also not about expertise. I think that that's an important thing to note too, right? Because a lot of this stuff is not being made by artists who are trained. It's like coming into community, and people are realizing that they can do it too, even if they don't have training or skill. Like they've never done it before, and they can totally be involved.
So here's like the level of meta. Here's Ernesto Urena with a photograph of this one social studies teacher.
There is the social studies teacher.
Here's the print of the teacher. There were billboards of this teacher around LA. So you have like this classic use of portraiture.
It says Rage Against the District back here. I'm into it.
Portraiture to engage people emotionally.
I mean, and that has that kind of that classic obey. That's the classic kind of obey framework, right? That's what that is nodding at.
Okay, so we are talking about politics then, aren't we? We're not talking about art anymore.
Well, we're talking about art and politics. So
okay,
they're never separate.
We're talking about culture. This is that's Cecilia Ortiz. She's president of
culture.
Oh, here we have one of the parachutes.
Yep. So we continue with the ephemera, and this particular box set, this mini archive, has 73 pieces.
Incredible.
Part of what we do is, as an educational organization, we want to provide interpretive material.
Right, that's what you were talking about before.
You want to have the ability, if you are a culture worker, you want to have the ability for your art to operate in different contexts.
And this is what a lot of my students and I have been working on, right? So they're making right now these materials for the sort of cross-set library installation, the archive and access thing. And we're not only making something that's an object, but we're thinking about like what kind of materials need to be made with the object to tell people how to use the object, right? So
Right,
you're like,
right.
you're thinking ahead about the user experience, not only it's, you know, and that's that thing about the library. It is a portal, not a box, right?
So this document is kind of another meta reflection of everything I just showed you. But what it has, if it goes to that next level, so you've got
Introduction by Marshall.
introduction by me, there's the box set again. You've got Nicholas Lampert giving a context, a historical context. But then you go to interviews with the union leaders.
Nicholas Lampert, that's our friend who did the People's Art, History of the United States.
So you have a complete catalog of everything. And then here's Cecilia talking about her ascendancy to, you know, through the United Teachers of LA. And she's also talking about how this art project affected her and why art was such an important part of this new history of union organizing. Nate Gunderson works with
what was the reason why she said that it was important?
Hold on a second. So he's talking about how the unions themselves have been reactivated by this more personal approach to culture making. Instead of sending stuff off to a shop, you have an art built that engages the community.
I was working for this public arts organization, Here More Art, and I brought Make the Road into a project that we were doing, and we ended up doing, you know, Make the Road, New York City and Queens. We did a lot of like interviews, like for this project, of like for the experiences of all of these undocumented immigrants that are coming through Queens, and like started working with Make the Road, and it's incredible actually to like have to make those connections.
But then, and you also have connections out to specific community organizations within any particular neighborhood in which you're working. So Spark in LA via Carlos Rogel, they actually hosted a lot of the art builds for UTLA.
And this is currently happening in New York with like the Urban Design Forum is like doing this major push like with all of these local organizations actually. So there's David again.
Yeah, and there's one little quote that I really want to read from here that David said. Let's see if I can quickly find it because it really is my favorite. I hope. Give me a second here. Take a break. Have a drink of water.
What would good like interstitial music be right now?
Yeah, talk amongst yourselves. I really, really want to find this little Jean-Louis. Now's your chance to talk, man.
Okay,
like
well, tell you
I'm impressed that I can whistle solidarity forever.
We're back to that antithesis of the art and the politics. Okay, we're right into it. You know, I always loved you because of your politics. Okay, I remember my favorite piece of yours was always the one that you that I actually bought from your ass, man, was the one, the man with the living room in his head, which was a portrait of your father.
Okay.
We're
grandfather,
back to,
but yes. Okay,
yeah,
so here's
the
David
man with the
Solman.
living room in his head.
I think, like a murmuration of birds, there is an emergent intelligence among organizers and artists, recognizing that we need art and culture to win a better world for our communities and the planet. I think there is a growing ecosystem of arts and culture work within social movements. I think that is good, and there are all kinds of different levels of it.
Ooh, love
So
that.
do
Does that
people know-
David Solnit? I'll put his name in the chat.
Do people know what a murmuration? Oh, should we go sit down again?
Sure.
Let's go sit down.
Yeah, it's a bunch of fucking birds, man.
So who? Okay, a murmuration of birds is, you know, when you look up into the sky and you see
It's
like
more than a flock. It's like a flock moving as an organic
It's a
organism.
collective
exactly.
intelligence, a collective intelligence.
Yes. And it's I just think it's a fabulous metaphor.
So interestingly, I have a book that I did that's in the collection. I'm just putting that quote was from David Solnit, by the way. And you know, I have a book that's in the OS collection that's up at Crossset, and it's a book inspired by In A. It's that classic sort of like improvisational music piece. And it was done by a group of dancers, and it was a piece that was dance and percussion, and it was all improvisational, and it would like go back and forth between the dancers. and the percussionist. And there were all these prompts, and there would be like one person in the percussion and in the dance who like kind of had a little bit more control, but otherwise they were all, every dancer was capable of sort of initiating a new prompt. And when it happened, it would have, then the percussionist would have to respond, or the dancers would have to respond. And one of the things that they worked with was this woman, she's a flock theorist. And so this incredible woman who is a scientist at Princeton, came and gave like lectures to the dancers and the percussionists about flock theory, so that they would have this other thing to think about when they were or weren't responding as a crowd to this sort of organic thing.
Yeah, the madness
journey, but I thought it was interesting.
The madness of crowds is exactly what we're talking about.
Okay, so one more chance to ask questions, folks.
It's true. This is the end.
Anyone out there?
Come, class. Who is out there? Alexa already asked a question. I know that some people in this group surely have questions. Well,
okay. So then we're going to go out on my last chance here. And one, I want to introduce this book called House Without a Roof. And it's by
bring it up to the camera.
A photographer called Adam Gulfer. He's a great young photographer. This is one of the only publications in the world that's in Hebrew, English, and Arabic. And it's about his family's story in Palestine. And it's a very interesting publication because it's not what you think it is. It's a completely different and extremely personal and creative perspective on this particular cultural situation within Palestine.
Where is Adam based now?
This is Booklyn's website. It's one of our publications. He's based out of New York. He was, I believe, at Hunter, and then he was the studio assistant for Susan Micielas. Okay. And he's just a wonderful person. And it's just first of all, it's a gorgeous book. And it's also just an amazing story. So leading out of there, we are obviously in a kind of litmus test of history. And so I just want to, I'm a Jewish New Yorker. My family goes back 200 years in this city. In 1972, when the Israeli government really started its descent into right-wing authoritarianism and let Phalangist troops attack a refugee camp in Lebanon. That was the end of most of my family's support of Israel. And so I was educated as an anti-Zionist from the time I was a teenager on up.
And I went to a Jewish socialist camp, so I was definitely
I just want to make a point to all the students here that we're not seeing a lot of support for the Palestinian people from American academic institutions. And we've actually seen a lot of really nasty things happen, especially at Columbia University and Harvard. So I think it is.
I think this week yelled at its own doxing truck.
Yeah. So I think I want to ask students around the country to support Palestine loudly, and to make demands of your institution to make public statements to do the same, and to not sit by and let corporate interests control both freedom of speech or allow a genocide to continue. And I also want to talk to people who identify as Jews. Zionism is a form of occupation of Judaism itself. The Zionists are occupying our culture, they're occupying our religion, they're occupying our traditions. And, Zionism is only about 100 years old.
The idea of the state is only a couple hundred years old.
This is a new thing. And the two things that, I take away as a cultural indicator that you can think about is that the Jewish star is not the sign of the Jewish people. The Star of David is not the sign of the Jewish people, and it never has been. The menorah is the icon of the Jewish people. The Star of David was introduced by the Zionists as a nationalist icon in the 1890s. So
it's in many churches that predate that date, right?
And it also has got a lot of other representations as an icon throughout Europe and the Middle East and Asia. So, if you are feeling affiliations for the Zionist state, check yourself. Your mind is occupied in the same way at a different level of reality as Palestine, as East Jerusalem, as the West Bank. This is an inflection point for the United States of America. We make Israel and Zionist apartheid possible. It's our money, it's our political will. So, you know, the Israeli progressives are also being crushed and jailed and beaten.
They're not even being allowed into Knesset. Like they're
Well,
actually
they were fucked at that fucking
So-
rave, man.
So you have to understand that it is Jews and progressives in the United States of America that will stop this genocide, that will prompt this ceasefire. So, you know,
this class has been amazing actually, because this was the class that had a working group that came forward to, when nothing was happening on campus, actually help build the reading room in the library, and they made informational zines. They'd only just learned InDesign, and they made zines, and we tabled and gave them out to students, and it actually like made a big difference for people. So this class has been very amazing on that. That's a cool one.
This one's lovely.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about what happens when you make a double side and the inside of your zine can be its own little poster.
Yeah, so this is a very simple, you know, eightfold.
We love the eightfold. We did it from our very first class. With our first class, there was no power on campus, so we made eightfold zines.
All right then, everyone.
This is your really last chance for questions. Oh, no, that's good. I was like, oh, there's one. No, it's actually the earlier one. Well, if you're here, would you maybe put yourselves back on camera and just kind of say thank you so much to Marshall and
Jean-Louis.
And Jean-Louis.
Our third host.
Sorry, I muted you, Jean-Louis, but only because Marshall was in the middle of his thing, but you are welcome to unmute yourself now. Thank you, Cassidy, for being our co-host just in case of emergency. It definitely has happened before. But thank you to everyone for being here. It was so nice to have you, and it was special to be able to be here with Marshall. And you know, my studio is right down the hall, the OS, and I have some incredible, you know, I have an Armenian and someone also from the Middle East in there. So we have a really interesting group of beautiful activists, artists in my studio as well. But come visit us in New York in the Army Terminal.
Yeah, and one last thing, just you know, Booklyn is always looking for new artists. We're always looking for new artwork. We're always looking for political ephemera. We offer a lot of services to artists.
It's true.
And we do a lot of programming around the city. And if you have a chance to take a look at our website, do so. Feel free to contact me. It's super easy to get a hold of me, mweber@booklyn.org.
Correct.
And thank you so much for all your time and attention and consideration.
So nice to have you guys here today. Thank you.
Yeah, peace, ceasefire now.
Thank you.
You. Bye. You. Bye, friends.
Jean-Louis, we'll talk later.
Au revoir, Jean-Louis.